Hello, welcome everyone to another episode of the Normal America Show. If you caught my show last night, which most of you didn't, you'd see that I'm going to have a new sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Schedule going forward. It's still going to be streaming at 9 p.m. Eastern time, but I'm going to do different types of shows on different days. So I'll have Drunken Debates coming up on Friday. I'll probably soon be starting a show with John Burke on Saturdays. Thursdays, I'll try to do interviews or debates. Thank you, Gizmo. Really appreciate the sub, man. Really do. Wednesday will be a normal show. Tuesday will be debate reviews. And Monday are going to be looking back at debates and conversations or videos that I've done in the past to see if they're still relevant to topics that we're discussing today. And so that's what I got for you today. We're going to be looking back at a debate I did with Chud Logic. That debate is from, let me check. I'm using Modern Day Debates video of this, and it was streamed on June 30th, 2021. So about a year and a half ago, I debated Chud Logic on this. I don't remember exactly what was said in the debate. I thought that I did very good. I felt good after this debate. I thought it wasn't a particularly contentious debate. There wasn't a lot of yelling and screaming, if I remember. But we'll see. I have not rewatched this debate. So, again, this is a year and a half ago. But I thought that this topic, which is, are conservatives censored more on social media? I thought, given the Twitter files revelations, that this would be something that would make sense to look into and see, how it adds up a year and a half later, how right I was, how wrong I was, if things are still relevant, and so on and so forth. We'll get started here. Now, the plan is I will be streaming at 1.25 speed because I'll be here all night otherwise. So it'll sound a little fast. I will let the debate go and pause when I feel that it's worth adding context. What was I going to say? Eventually, this Monday, Tuesday stream will be Rumble and Comfy exclusives. So several times tonight, I will remind people, please go over to comfy.stream and find me. Set up an account there and find me. It's free to set up. Or go over to rumble.com and find me there. I'll be putting the links up for how you can follow me on those platforms. But the idea is to bring people over to those platforms because half these debates that I'll review, if someone's banned on Twitch and I don't know it and I review the debate, then I'm banned on Twitch. If there's a topic or a word said that you're not allowed to say on YouTube, then I'm banned on YouTube. So I don't think there was anything crazy in this debate. That's why I feel comfortable showing it on Twitch and YouTube. But starting next week, these reviews will be exclusive to Rumble and to Comfy. And so that means you will not see me on Mondays and Tuesdays anymore unless you're on Rumble and Comfy. So it's one of the things I'm trying to do this new year. It's inevitable that I will get kicked off of these platforms of Twitch and YouTube. So I'm trying to put an audience over to those other platforms, Rumble and Comfy. Also, you can find me on Twitter. I'll be streaming there as well. So I should be live streaming to Twitter right now as we speak. So without too much more fanfare, I say we get into it. Now, again, I have not watched this debate. This is a year and a half old. I have not watched this debate since it occurred. I mean, I never watched it. I participated in it. So I have no idea how it's going to go. All I did was try to slide to where it looked like the introductions were. And that's it. So it could be terrible. I don't know. Feel free to put in the comments how you think it's going. If you think that, what I said was relevant still today, if I was right, if I was wrong, I'm up for any of that. So, last thing I'll say is I am special thanks to Modern Day Debate that hosted this. Kaz, I'm unfamiliar with, but he was moderating on this particular evening. Normally, I know James from Modern Day Debate, but I have to use their video of this, and I'll put a link to that here real quick. The reason is the last time I got mass reported on YouTube, I had to delete like a year and a half worth of videos from that platform. And so a lot of these old debates, I have to use the people I debated against. Yeah, the rewind. Rob Rewind. That's the idea. So, all right, let's jump in. There's the link, though. So you could check it out. Give Modern Day Debate a follow if you like this. All right, let's do it.
Swords with robnoerr for your enjoyment.
Here we go. So I'm having problems with my headset. That's going to be... I don't know what's going on with this headset. It's incredibly frustrating. Give me 1 second. That's why I'm starting late. I was having trouble. It's doing the same thing. This is frustrating. Give me 1 second. I might have a backup headset. Let's see if this works any better. I do apologize. Slightly new stuff going on here with my tech, so I'll try this. Should do it.
And when he returns, he will be a slave to the Dark Prince. So going first tonight, Rob will be take it away. Go ahead, Rob.
Thanks so much. Yeah, my name is robnoerr. You can find me on Twitch at robnoerr at twitch.tv. It's spelled like it looks there, ROBNOERR. Really glad to be here. Thanks for moderating.
First off, I just got to comment on when I was wearing sunglasses inside with like the Hawaiian shirts. Good stuff. Good stuff. I did it because friends of mine told me I was at a party and I had sunglasses on inside, and friends of mine told me I look like a doofus. So I was like, I embraced the doofus. So let me know in the chat if the audio is okay. If it's unbearable, the speed, let me know. But hopefully the speed will be fine. So let's keep going here.
Chud Logic, thanks so much for being here. Should be a fun discussion. So the first thing I'll say is the wording of this debate is weird. Hopefully we don't get into a semantic argument about what the term persecuted means. I'm taking this to mean that conservatives are more unfairly censored and treated harsher on social media than liberals or Democrats or groups that aren't conservative. So I think that is undoubtedly true. There's three ways in which I'll seek to prove that. The first way is we'll look at the treatment of regular people, not people that are professional politicians or media people, and we'll see how the numbers suggest, at least in one particular area, and we could see anecdotally as well, that people who are conservatives are far more likely to be censored, to be shadow banned, to have followers be taken away. This is true in places like Facebook. It's true in places like Twitter. It's true in places like YouTube. It's also true in search algorithms and things like that, as we'll get to a little longer. But this is different than prominent people that we see censored, which will be a secondary thing. This is important because as the internet has become more and more powerful to sharing our voices, particularly in a time like COVID, where people are talking less face-to-face and more every day online on these social media platforms, we see a near monopoly from these three companies, in addition to a few other companies that are controlling massive amounts of the flow of information. And so if these companies are censoring or treating one political party or one political ideology more harshly than another political ideology, it becomes a very big issue, and it gives people the power to control the narrative, which is always a dangerous thing. So again, the first way we'll look at this is through the regular people and their treatment of this. The second way we'll look is people in positions of power. And by this, I mean people, you might call them a blue checkmark class on Twitter. So people that have more of an influence because they're entertainers, they're politicians, they're media people, they're pundits, and things like that. And what we'll see is overwhelmingly people that lean right or conservative are censored far more, up to the highest echelons of people in positions of power, such as the former president of the United States and other mainstream politicians, governors, media professionals, etc. We oftentimes see that conservatives in this group are censored for the same things that we see that Democrats or liberals are allowed to say. And so that's going to be a massive problem as well, because this will have great ramifications into things like elections, into shaping a public narrative of which politicians to follow. And this will be able to convince a plurality of people to basically believe anything that the people pushing the narrative want to occur. So that's the second lens through which we'll view this. The third lens that we'll view this has nothing to do with the people, but the types of arguments that are censored. And in that, we'll see that there are certain arguments on many social media platforms that are verboten, that you're not allowed to bring up. Almost all of these arguments are designed to protect the interests of left-wing, or if we're going to quibble about what the left really is, Democratic politicians. And so if you try to question certain stories of official stories of COVID, for example, official stories of elections, elections and things like that, and you happen to come from a conservative bent, you tend to be censored. However, if you tend to criticize those same things against a Trump regime or against Republican politicians, that's usually allowed to fly. So using these three things, we'll see that, yes, it is self-evident that conservatives are treated more harshly, and it is a big deal. I'll use data when I can. I'll use the stories and stories that we've seen of people that were censored and things like that. And we'll also talk about some sort of tangential things, such as social media's power to influence elections, according to studies that were done, and how they're able to sway millions of votes by the way they position their algorithm and their censorship. However, I do want to give an olive branch to Chud Logic here, because actually the formational question of this debate, I think, is not the question we should be asking, because no doubt there are left-wing people that are censored by these social media companies. The problem is this: it's not a left versus right issue. It is an establishment versus people that criticize the establishment issue. And so we see left-wingers that want to be critical, for example, of the Biden administration, or critical of the CDC, or critical of sort of the neocon, neo-lib, forever warmongering policy that we see in the United States. We see people on the left that make those sort of criticisms that are also censored. The reason is because these people are using this narrative control. We have government actively working with these social media companies, and you can see it. You've seen when we see people like Dorsey or Zuckerberg or others called in front of Congress that Democratic lawmakers continually excoriate them for not censoring people enough. We need to censor more fake news. We need to censor more. We've even had the Biden administration make public calls for these social media companies to censor more. This is intended to circumvent the First Amendment, because if government is encouraging private companies to censor people, and these private companies have a near monopoly, and they're some of the most powerful entities in the history of the world, so much so that the wealth of some of these companies is greater than almost every country in the world. If government is working hand in hand to censor people, and there's at least 2 lawsuits out there alleging just that with proof in those lawsuits, then this becomes hugely problematic. The reason that conservatives are censored more than left-wing, given that the real value is people criticizing the establishment versus people that don't criticize the establishment, is because in our current political landscape, conservatives tend to not be in positions of power culturally, and therefore they're more likely to criticize the establishment. That's why it turns out that by censoring people that are critical of the establishment, it ends up being more conservatives. So to the fundamental question of the debate, yes, it is undoubtable that conservatives are censored more and are treated more harshly or persecuted, as the language of the debate says. It's undoubtable. But the real issue is it's because they are being critical of the establishment. And if you're on the left, you should heavily be concerned about these attempts at censorship, because one day you'll want to criticize people in positions of power and they'll come for you as well. That's all I have for my opening statement.
All right, so if you're just joining me, we are re-looking back. This debate occurred in January of 2021. I'm using modern day debate video of it because I was forced to delete a year's worth of my videos because of community guideline strikes, etc. Nonetheless, I think that was pretty prescient. So again, this is a year and a half ago this debate took place. Who did you hear talking about government working with social media to censor in that forceful of a way, other than me? I was saying this a year and a half ago. I was talking about how I outlined 3 things that I will do in this debate. I will show that the average conservative, someone who's just a regular person that's not an influencer or a politician or a media professional, they're censored more on social media. How the people that are in that more professional class are also censored more. And there are arguments critical of particularly the Democrats, but the establishment in general, that are the types of arguments that are censored more. I said that although conservatives no doubt are censored more, it's less a conservative versus liberal or left versus right. It's more of establishment versus anti-establishment. If you're someone criticizing the establishment and you happen to be left-wing, then you would be subject to be censored as well. And I finished up talking about how the government was working in tandem, was coercing these companies and working with these companies, and how that was intended to circumvent the First Amendment. Now, given what we know from the Twitter files, we now have proof of this. Now, I knew this a year and a half ago. If you followed my channel, you knew that as well. But it's interesting to go back and look at this after the Twitter files have proven that this actually is the case. The last thing that I mentioned there was, how influential it would be to control the narrative and how that would help you win elections, and whoever was doing the censorship, it was a tremendous amount of power. So I am very happy with that opening statement and how things have turned out now. We'll see what Chud says.
Okay, thank you so much. That was only about 5 minutes. All right, I just want to do some quick housekeeping real quick. We have we had 10 minute openings for each of you guys slotted. That was only 5 minutes, but we do have 10 minutes for Chud Logic. Then we have 50 minutes of open dialogues get slotted, and then 30 minutes for audience Q&A. I want to remind you guys to tag either me as Factitionalist Network or at Modern Day Debates if you want your questions to be asked. Super chats get top priority, so please send in your super chats as soon as you can if you want to get your questions asked. They'll go straight to the top of the list. Praise I Am That I Am is producing the stream. Want to make sure to welcome everyone to Modern Day Debate. We are a neutral platform hosting debates on science, religion, and politics, and we want you all to feel welcome no matter what walk of life you come from. Our guests are linked in the description below, and whether you are listening via podcast or on YouTube, so just click those links if you are liking what you are hearing and you want to hear more. Hit the subscribe button, please. Hit the like button. Share the videos if you want to hear more debates. We have lots of juicy debates coming up for you. And with that, let's go ahead and kick it over to Chud Logic for your 10-minute opening. When you are ready, you may begin.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Chud Logic. I'm a lefty streamer. Talk about a whole bunch of stuff, particularly big tech and the issues that we all face under the auspices of their rules. So if that's something that interests you, you want to hear what else I talk about, come by my stream. You can find it by searching Chud Logic on Twitch. And I sometimes upload to YouTube, although I unfortunately have been a victim of big tech. My channel is being completely demonetized, and I'm still waiting for them to review it. So yeah, but you might find the odd video on YouTube as well. Okay, so in terms of my opening statement, 645 billion. This is the total number of interactions Donald Trump had on his Facebook page between January 1st and November 3rd, 2020. This is just one of numerous examples that point clearly to conservatives having not only a prominent position on social media, but an influential one too. The questions around free speech and big tech censorship are very important to me. Anyone that watches my content knows I speak about these.
Now, right out of the gate, I'm not going to relitigate the debate entirety, but you notice how his strategy here, right? Like his strategy is to say, well, there are still a lot of conservatives and a lot of conservative reach on social media. Well, the reason that conservatives had, I would say, probably a bigger than average reach on social media was because all traditional forms of media and all institutions tend to go the other way. It tends to go towards the establishment and the Democratic Party. And so when, for example, take the entertainment industry. Let's say that you want to watch a late night comedy show. Well, back in my parents' day, you could turn on Johnny Carson and he was basically apolitical. But now you turn on a late night show and all of them are going to give you the same establishment Democratic talking points in politics. The same is true of most of our newspapers, of most of our media, other than like Fox News, though Fox has its problems, but it's putting a slightly different sort of the establishment Republican view on things. So social media was really a platform where people that didn't have a voice in other areas were able to speak, whether that be an individual like me, whether that be just an individual that doesn't even have a show, it's just a regular person, or whether it be a person that's bigger, such as James Woods or Roger Stone or Donald Trump or Trump Jr. or, you know, Dan Bongino, those sorts of people that traditionally didn't fit into those other marketplaces. This doesn't address the fact, just because there were conservatives that had a lot of reach, that there wasn't undue censorship going against conservatives. But you can see how he's trying to conflate the two. Well, if there's a successful conservative, if Trump had a lot of relikes and tweets, then that proves that conservatives weren't being censored. This is nonsense. But you can figure that out.
This often, and I try hard to hold reasonable and consistent positions on these issues. However, one big frustration I have are the ways in which conservatives seem obsessed with turning these issues into a grotesque culture war spectacle. Reasonable discourse and discussion is often transformed into rhetoric whining of victimhood and perceived oppression. Although studies and data around these specific issues are admittedly limited as it stands, what we do have simply does not support the cries of persecution that some conservatives make.
And here you have it, right? And this is something that you see routinely happen to people on the left or people that are defending the establishment, where they are benefactors of these institutions that are heavily benefiting them. And when you call out the bias in these institutions, they say, oh, you have a victim complex. You're a whiner. Stop whining. These are people that are, you know, perpetual whingers that can't find an issue that they won't whine about. If they were freaking out when Elon Musk was buying Twitter, not because they were worried they were being censored, but because they were worrying that the obvious censorship against people they hated would stop. And so they are the biggest whiners in the world, but when you accurately point out how terrible this censorship is, how much of a double standard it is, they just tell you to quit whining. So.
But Chud, I hear you cry. Donald Trump was banned from Facebook. Surely this must be proof of a liberal plot to censor and oppress conservatives on these platforms. This is yet another attempt by conservatives to obfuscate the truth of these issues. Although these individual examples are supposed to prove the outlandish conspiracy theories of the conservative, they simply prove the rather embarrassing fact that conservatives often have great difficulty following the rules of these platforms.
Notice he uses the term conspiracy theory already. As we go back on these rewinds, watch how many times people call me a conspiracy theorist for things that we can now definitively prove. Now, do you think Chud Logic came out and apologized for calling people conspiracy theories for articulating what we now have proof through the Twitter files of? Of course not. This is their way of getting out of the debate. They say you're a whiner, you're a conspiracy theorist. Twitter and Facebook and all them tell us they're not doing it, so therefore it's not happening. Now shut your mouth. It is the same old playbook.
Indeed, if you dig into the often cited examples of brave free speech warriors banned for merely speaking truth to power, you will find a root of flagrant disregard for the most basic points of these platforms' terms of service. Bear in mind, I agree that there ought to be a robust discussion about TOS, and even the extension of free speech on these platforms. Inconsistency in application of these rules is something that has personally affected me as a leftist. That is what makes it so frustrating when conservatives tend to only bring this up as a defense and deflection for repeated and flagrant disregard for the rules by bad actors. There are even cases, for example, Stephen Crowder, of conservatives flagrantly breaking rules, complaining about persecution, yet still retaining large, prominent, and influential accounts on the very platforms they claim are trying to eradicate them. The pathetic and self-serving victimhood of such people really knows no bounds. To move on to individual conservatives on these platforms.
Now, again, he says basically it's, oh, the reason conservatives are censored more is because they break the rules more. We now know that's not true from the Twitter files. The Twitter files showed that there were government agencies that were actually contacting Twitter, and no doubt the other social media platforms, saying that they wanted people that were telling jokes censored. They wanted people that were questioning things about vaccines or COVID censored, or the origins of COVID. They wanted people that were questioning things about the election censored. So it's not just all these conservatives are bad people that said the N-word or called for violence. That's why they've been censored. We didn't even see the censorship of Donald Trump through the Twitter files and how nonsensical it was that he was censored, even though he wasn't breaking any of the rules. So he's just factually wrong here, as I'm sure I'll point out in this debate, but we now see through the Twitter files as well.
In this atmosphere and in this climate, I don't actually blame them for thinking there's a grand liberal plot to specifically censor them. To speak briefly to what Rob was saying, I actually agree that these platforms do have an impetus, in some cases, to censor or in some way impact criticism of them. I don't think this is a broad conspiracy, though. This is just capital working as intended. All of this serves to hide the truth.
Capital working as intended, and again, the same people that said it's a private company, they can do what they want, had no problem with people like Adam Schiff just recently, for example, saying that if Elon doesn't start controlling hate speech, they'll have regulations of Twitter. The Twitter files that showed that government agencies were coercing and discussing with Twitter on what to censor. So none of everything he's saying here, as I'm sure I'll get to in this debate, is just incorrect, but we now definitively know that's the case through the Twitter files coming out. And I'm sure this is one of the reasons that you don't see the media. I don't follow Chud Logic. I would be interested to hear what he said about the Twitter files. Maybe I'll reach out to him and see if he wants to have a discussion about this, because what you see is he's making a lot of the arguments that the Democratic establishment did, the media, etc. And now that it turns out we have definitive proof that he's wrong, they're just not talking about the story. The media just doesn't cover the Twitter files because for years, this is what they were saying. And one of the reasons that again, this debate that you're watching right now that I'm commentating on is from June 2021. So over a year and a half ago. And one of the reasons it's important is because we forget the lies, the insane stories that come out that are covered in the news. It's so rapidly changing that we forget what their narrative was, even a few short months ago. So it's good to go back and see what were these people saying back then, because now they're telling us, well, we knew all along. We knew that this censorship was occurring and it was okay. No, that's not what they were saying when this was happening, which is one of the reasons I wanted to go back and look at this.
The challenges and issues of free speech, expression, and big tech concern us all, regardless of political ideology. There are plenty of examples of these issues affecting left-wing accounts or even apolitical accounts, as recent controversies on platforms such as Twitch have shown us. This is truly a bipartisan issue that requires a bipartisan solution. We must not let conservative victimhood obscure this fact. Rather than continue with the rhetoric cries of free speech grievance, which is with its numerous clowns and theatrics, let's work to find the reasonable common ground and figure out practical and effective solutions together. And that's it.
You got it. Those were both very short opening statements. Before we get into the 15-minute dialogue, I just want to thank the moderators in the chat for their dedication to the channel and for suppressing the urge to jump in on one side or the other of the conversation. And I want to remind everybody in the chat to attack the ideas and not the person. So if you have a comment or question for the debaters, please go ahead and send in those super chats and go ahead. If you have a comment, it's perfectly fine, just as long as you're attacking the ideas and not the person. And again, links are in the description. Please hit the like and subscribe button. And with that, let's go ahead and kick it into the open dialogue. Gentlemen, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So to respond to what you said, I assumed that this would how the debate would go. The debate would go, of course, conservatives are censored more and prominent conservatives are censored more, but that's because they deserve it. And that's just fundamentally not true. Let me ask you to start with, do you think that everyone that's censored from social media has done something to warrant it?
Not necessarily, no. I think that, there's cases where social media companies will apply TOS incorrectly or inconsistently, and that can have a negative impact on people regardless of their political ideology. Quick example of this, recently you had Right Wing Watch banned from YouTube and Andy No banned from SoundCloud. So both of those channels, I think were wrongly taken down, although this did happen after large media campaigns in both cases to bring attention to it, and they both had their accounts reinstated. So I don't think that it's, yes, sure, it's inconsistent and can be applied incorrectly. People can be banned unfairly, but I don't think it's significantly different in one particular political direction, no.
So we'll talk about, but the concession is that, of course, they could do things unfairly. So do you have any
wait, no, I'm not conceding that. I'm not here to fucking defend big tech. Big tech sucks.
No, I don't mean concession in that sense. I just mean we're in agreement. Is that a better way to put it?
Yeah, we're in agreement. Sure.
Okay, sure. Not just setting a baseline here. So do you dispute the fact that more conservatives are banned or are shadow banned or are censored on these platforms than liberals? Do you think that that's true and that's just that they deserve it? Or are you disputing whether or not more are banned?
Well, I think we're getting to the point where we're conflating terms, because my understanding of your use of liberal is anyone on the left. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that tends to be how Americans refer to it. Now, I would say that, mainstream liberals that say support Biden, sure, they're probably not going to be as censored as much as, a far right conservative. But I would argue that a sort of mainline liberal or a mainline conservative, a centrist conservative type, they're probably going to see censorship at equal measures. It's only when you get to the extremes of the political sides.
He's basically conceding my entire argument. If you listen to my opening statement, I talked about more than it's a left-right issue, it is an establishment, anti-establishment issue. And basically what he says is, well, if you're a centrist that's not really criticizing the establishment and you're on the right or the left, you're probably not going to be censored as much as people that, even on the left or the right that are more radical, which is exactly my point. He's conceding it already, which is funny.
That's where you tend to see a ramping up of political ideology. But that isn't because of ideology. I think it's more to do primarily with profit motive and these platforms being concerned about certain messages being, problematic for advertisers. And so I don't think it's an ideological driven decision. It's a decision driven out of wanting to make money. And that's my perspective on it.
So ideology.
We now know through the Twitter files that the people that were running your Yoel Roths, your James Bakers, etc., absolutely were ideologically bent towards censoring right-wing people, people that supported Trump, people that criticized the establishment. This is an argument that I find tiresome, that you constantly hear, and I'm glad that I'm reviewing this debate because I forgot about how this is good. This is one of the reasons I wanted to do this. Constantly, I'm talking about, bias in the media, bias in social media, and the defense from people on the left will be, well, it's just profit. That's all it is. It's not that they're ideologically driven. It's just that this is the best decision for them to make money. And we have these big, long debates about it. It's like, but money's just a way to get power. And if they could get power in ways that aren't money, such as if they could virtue signal and they think that'll get them more money or power in the long run, that would be equally problematic. It doesn't matter if it's money or ideology. The end result is the same. This censorship is affecting our way of our culture. It's affecting our elections. But these people, although there is a profit motive, certainly are ideologically driven as well. And the Twitter files effectively put that to rest. The releases from the private emails and communications to the top people at Twitter show beyond a shadow of a doubt their bias, that they are ideologically driven to support the establishment left. End of story. So it's not a defense. It doesn't matter if it was purely profit motive. As I've always argued, it's still bad. But that's not true. That's not what it was. And that was evident back then when this debate occurred a year and a half ago. And it's even more evident now that we see through the Twitter files.
Side, like we could get into that debate, but the question is it existing or not? So just so I'm steel manning your position is when it comes to moderate right wingers or moderate conservatives and moderate left wingers, they're censored at equal clips. But at the extremes, yes, extreme right wingers might be censored more than extreme left wingers.
I mean, I think, okay, so what I'd say is I think that you can probably find more examples of extreme right wingers being censored, like Stefan Molyneux, Nick Fuentes, Alex Jones. So people like that who have got what are perceived to be fairly extremist views. But I don't think that it's because they're conservative that they're targeted. It's because their views are so morally egregious to broader society that it is like such an affront to advertisers. That's the reason that these people tend to be dropped from these platforms.
Okay, so let's talk one. Like, so I outlined three ways. We could obviously, I want to give you time to talk as well. So I think maybe the beginning focus is regular people and whether or not regular people get censored. Now, there were a lot of people from 2016 to 2020 on one particular issue that said that they had no confidence in the outcome of the 2016 election. There are a lot of people since the 2020 election that said that they have no confidence in the outcome of that. Twitter itself has banned or severely limited over 200,000 accounts of people that have mentioned the election post 2020. I have no evidence of ever banning anyone that said that the election was fraudulent in 2016, despite the fact that polling from u.gov shows that 2/3 of Democrats not only believe that the election was stolen from Hillary Clinton, but literally believe that Russia hacked voting machines to switch tallies to fraudulently elect Donald Trump. Why is it if conservatives and liberals are censored at the exact same amount, if they have the same positions, do we see the mass censorship of conservatives on this issue, but the no censorship whatsoever of liberals or Democrats on that issue in 2016 through 2020?
Sure. I mean, that's a perfectly valid and reasonable thing to bring up. My response to that is my understanding of the different dynamics that are at play is that the manifestation of this rhetoric was quite different in each case. For example, if you look at the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton conceded defeat fairly quickly. I've got no doubt that you can probably find some fucking liberal type person making,
Again, you can see hashtag it's different. That's what he's going to say. He says, oh, well, it's because they're January 6th. So therefore we can censor 200,000 people on Twitter that question the election. But all the violence that occurred after 2016, like immediately on the day that Trump was sworn in or right after the election, or violence that we saw in perpetuity going from there, that doesn't count. So Democrats are allowed to question elections because they're never violent, but Republicans got violent. So therefore, anyone who questions an election where Democrats win, we have to censor them. But if you question elections when Republicans win, it won't lead to violence, so it's okay. It's absolutely, it's ridiculous. It's just pure double standard bias. That's all it is. And again, the idea that we would censor people that aren't calling for violence, that are like, we have questions about the 2020 election, is outrageous. Particularly when many of these questions ended up being legitimate, like chain of custody questions or questions about ballot harvesting and things like that. To claim that you can't question them because someone went out, a small number of people went out and did something violent, is absurd. And it's the exact type of censorship that I'm talking about. We now know from the Twitter files that not only was there an ideological bent from the people at Twitter, and no doubt from other social media companies as well, to want to censor these sorts of ideas, but the U.S. government in various forms was pressuring them to do that.
Maybe extreme points about the election. Maybe there's a case of inconsistency we could look at on that specific basis. But broadly speaking, I think the narrative was that Russia influenced the US election. And also I don't think that was lined up with specific calls of actions to take to subvert American democracy. I use that term quite loosely. I've got my criticism of American democracy, but that's besides the point, okay? Whereas if you look at the 2020 election, the flavor, if you like, of the rhetoric was very different. It was quite pointed, and it seemed directed at invoking people to engage in specific action, which transpired in the events of January 6th. Just to be clear, I'm not, one of these poll clubs.
Again, he concedes that there were 200,000 accounts that were suspended, shadow banned, removed, etc. And his argument is here, well, they were directing people to do something? That's absurd. It's just absolutely absurd. The idea that all these people that were censored were merely censored because they were like, you should go storm the Capitol. That's nonsense. He knows it, and I know it, and now we have proof through the Twitter files.
just about January the 6th. I've got my criticism of some of the narratives around it, but I think, to deny the fact that they were there in some way to subvert a democratic process is wrong. And I think that was absolutely G'd up and fueled by commentary from right-wing commentators online, particularly Donald Trump. I think there's a different flavor between the two things.
But again, so already we see, so the concession is, well, yes, right-wing people with these beliefs that shared similar opinions of the left-wing people are censored far greater than the left-wing people. I just think it was warranted because right-wing people took what was being said and went out and used violence. But we don't see this sort of logic applied in other ways. For example, we saw riots that occurred all summer.
Wait, sorry. I think we're moving on a bit quick there. Let's just go back to what we were talking about.
Sure.
Do you disagree that the flavor or the narratives that were pushed were different between 2016 and 2020? Or do you think they were exactly the same?
Of course, nothing's exactly the same, but they are very similar in the ways that's important. In fact, the narrative that was pushed by the Democrats from 2016 to 2020 was worse because it actually used state power to push conspiracy theories to violate U.S. citizens' rights in the form of basically engaging in a coup to use unverified opposition research paid for by Hillary Clinton, sourced by Russian spies, to be able to spy on the Trump campaign. And they used leaks, unmasked people, and used leaks to the media to smear people surrounding the Trump campaign to make the public think that he was literally a stooge of Russia. So much so that official U.gov polls suggested that 2/3 of Democrat voters thought that Russia literally hacked machines. We saw riots as the result of Donald Trump being elected. We saw attacks against Russian people. Xenophobia against Russians in this country increased, which I can provide evidence if you want, and the mistreatment of Russians increased. We saw Trump supporters being attacked for some of the lies that were being told. So this sort of stuff did lead to violence, but no one said, oh, we have to censor these dangerous conspiracy theories that say that the election was stolen. This is not.
Wow, I gotta say, June 2021, Rob was on it. Absolutely true. I have nothing to add here in the future. You can see that I knew it even back then. I have nothing to add. Great comment, Rob.
Nonsense, right? And it's similarly, if we're going to censor rhetoric because it could lead to violence, again, we saw these riots that occurred in the name of George Floyd and, the idea of systemic racism. There was never any evidence that the death of George Floyd had anything to do with, real quick, I'll finish. There was never evidence that that was a directly result of the officer that killed George Floyd being racist. Yet we saw riot after riot. There was no talks to censor misinformation online. What about hands up, don't shoot? That was a lie. That led to riots.
We're on point three now. Let's just take a step back and go step by step. So to bring it back a bit, we're talking about the election. So you mentioned a coup. Okay. Now, I'll be honest with you. I don't necessarily think that using the word coup is the best way to describe January 6th. That being said, though, I'm interested to understand what event happened around the 2016 election that was the equivalent of a riot in the Capitol building to subvert democracy, or attempt to.
Well, I mean, for example, we saw massive riots that occurred in cities around the country during Trump's inauguration. And in addition to that...
But wait, that's protest. Wait a sec, that's protest, though. What did they try and subvert democracy? Well,
protests aren't using violence. People were being beaten, stores were being looted, fires were being set. That's not protest.
But like I say, what was the purpose of that? Was it to change the process of American democracy? I just don't think there was an event that you can point to as significant as what happened on January 6th, where people stormed the government building to try and subvert or change the democratic process that was going through at the time.
Sure, I could list two off the top of my head. May 31st, 2020, where we saw people that claimed that they wanted to remove or kill Donald Trump and lit fires at a church and other places around D.C., stormed the White House. The only reason that they were unable to get in the White House, despite the fact that they were armed more than anyone on January 6th, they were armed with Molotov cocktails, lasers designed to blind police, clubs, other sorts of weapons. The only reason they were unsuccessful at getting into there was because the security understood that with those sort of people coming to town, that there was likely to be violence because of the rhetoric that was being announced online. Unlike with Trump supporters, we hadn't seen any rallies of his really where we saw violence. So they were taken aback. We could get into this, but Trump himself was the only politician on record that actually requested the National Guard be there. Mario Bowser, the Democratic mayor, and we saw a Democrat sergeant of arms that's under Nancy Pelosi, both said that they didn't want increased security there. So again, we can see that we saw the only difference between May 31st and January 6th is the police were able to stop one group that sought to go in and remove a legitimate elected member of government. And in the other instance, they were unable to stop them from getting into the building. And yet once they got in the building, they were almost all entirely peaceful. And it was only a Trump supporter that was shot. We also see the incident of...
That's not really true. There's some other people died as well.
It's not true about that. Sure, I'm willing to talk. Well,
there was a police officer that died. Now, I admit that there were immediate reports which said the head was smashed in by a fire extinguisher by Trump supporters, which turned out to not be true. I think it was Officer Sicknick, I believe the person's name was.
Correct. That's correct, yeah.
But basically, they had I don't know exactly what happened precisely medically, but my understanding is something was aggravated by tear gas, I believe, and they had a heart attack, which led to their death. So
that's not true. That's not true. The coroner said that they were unable to find any video evidence whatsoever that he ingested tear gas, nor were they able to find that tear gas resulted in the stroke that he received. It's totally inconclusive.
Well, do you think that would have happened though if the event of those days? Do you think he just had a heart attack anyway?
he had a stroke, and yes, he could have. There were other officers right, like stuff like that happens. Remember, there were also 4 people that died that had nothing to do with that. 3 people that died aside from Sicknick and Ashley Babbitt, and they died of medical conditions as well, and they had nothing to do whatsoever with rioting. So yeah, I mean, even in a like robust protest that nothing illegal is happening, sure, people's blood pressure could rise, people could suffer strokes and things like that. Like, sure, that could happen.
Yeah.
No,
I mean,
like,
just to be clear as well, like, I think that the way.
And again, one of the things that I always think's funny about this, they also like to go on to include, like, well, months after January 6th, several officers committed suicide. Well, how many times when there was a riot from Antifa or Black Lives Matter or some other group, and tear gas was deployed and police were forced to engage in some sort of conflict, do we keep tabs on, were any officers, months later, did they have a stroke? Or the next day, did they have a stroke? Or did they kill themselves months later? No one keeps tabs on that when it's left-wingers. It's just on the right wing. When this happened one time, they're like, oh, anything that happened to these officers, for the next 2 years, it was because of January 6th. So how do we know? We could go back and be like, wow, look at the, for example, we know in Black Lives Matter, in Dallas, a Black Lives Matter supporter shot and murdered 5 police on scene. But they don't want to talk about that, If we went back to, Minneapolis, how many police officers committed suicide after they burnt down the precinct? I don't know. Do they? Is anyone keeping track of those numbers? So you could see the double standards, and he's making a mistake here. Now, this debate is supposed to be about conservative censorship on social media, and he's making a mistake of getting right into my wheelhouse. Talking about January 6th, talking about FBI corruption and things like that, and you can tell that he's out of his league. He doesn't know as much as I do on these things, and he really doesn't have any rebuttal to it.
That some people acted around the murder of Ashley Babbitt was disgraceful. She was an unarmed protester, riot, whatever you want to call it, shot by police. So that was really bad, right? But yeah, what I'm a bit perplexed by, without getting too much into the weeds, is, well, what event happened that matched that in terms of its ferocity, I guess, or because you're talking about, you call them riots, I call them protests, maybe it's tomato situation, but I just don't think there was anything as significant as that happened around the 2016 election. And I'll be happy if you've got any links or anything that I could look at this.
Sure. So we saw the riots that occurred as Trump was being inaugurated. We saw riots again. And again, there were others. So we had the May 31st situation, which I told you about. We also had with the Capitol, the conspiracy theories that were unsourced about Brett Kavanaugh. We saw people storm the heart building of the Capitol, storm past police that was trying to keep them out, and then chase senators into elevators. We saw that occur. Now, so what this is, and all of this is a red herring anyways from the issue to say, well, we're conceding that far more conservatives were censored. We're just saying because the rhetoric they were using was used by a very small amount of people to do a bad thing. And let me be as clear as possible. Those that engaged with fighting with the police on January 6th that were Trump supporters absolutely should be prosecuted, and it was despicable. I called that out on the day of January 6th, and I'll continue to say that. Having said that, the events of that day have been massively blown out of proportion, and the majority of people that were there were only exercising their free rights. And by majority, I mean over 99%. And even those that went into the Capitol, although it's a crime, it should be a crime in the same vein that it was a crime when people entered the Capitol under Kavanaugh. They should be given a small fine. Instead, they're held in solitary confinement. But I'm not here to talk about the treatment of them. What I'm here to talk about is this is all a red herring from, you've already conceded far more conservatives were censored. You're just saying, well, that's because a small number of them, a minuscule number of them, that said this thing enacted violence. Is that the same standard that social media has when other movements enact violence based on rhetoric we see online?
The problem you've got there, right, is you're using these grand figures. So, for example, you say, oh, this many people were censored, right? If you told me, you won't believe it, 100,000 people were censored last year on social media, and then it transpired that, well, the reason they were censored is because they were uploading indecent images of children, for example, I would go, well, yeah, that's, understandable. They were breaking the rules in a significant, severe way. So it's just to contextualize it a little bit, And listen, I will happily admit and discuss around TOS and its unfair enforcement, but if fundamentally, conservatives have issues following the rules that are in place, that a different conversation could be had about whether the TOS is fair, whether it's enforced fairly, but at a fundamental basis, you've got to follow the rules of the platform.
Again, I mean, you can tell that he's just, objectively, he has lost this debate. He's like, yeah, okay, TOS, they're vague, they're not enforced the same way, but you still have to follow the rules. Well, that's the entire debate. The entire debate is there is a double standard in the enforcements of this, and conservatives or people that criticize the establishment are censored, shadow banned, etc. more. And then, I don't know if we get to it in this debate, but the implications of that are, well, if you have these platforms that massively influence our social conversations, and you're censoring people that are making certain types of arguments, then you're moving the needle on our culture and on our elections. Yeah, Bleezers, that's really it's really a tragedy. My friends are texting me right now about the game. Apparently there was a small hit on a Buffalo Bills player that made a tackle, and then he stood up and fell over, and it appears as if he may not have made it. That's terrible. I'm not going to. I've not seen the hit. I don't know anything about the gentleman other than he's a football player. My thoughts and prayers are to him and his family. I'm not going to speculate on what caused it, but absolutely terrible, 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 terrible. What's up, Computer Carnage? But anyways, back to the debate here.
That you're on to the best of your ability. I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, follow the rules, five head. Like, I don't know how else to put it.
But this is always the excuse of authoritarian and censorships. And let me try to bring this to an argument that maybe you would agree with, right? Like, we understand that people sometimes, when law enforcement at a local or smaller level behaves improperly, what they do is they selectively enforce the law. So, for example, if you lived in a town where 100 people were arrested for jaywalking and 98% of them were black, and the officer said, well, that's because they broke the law. They broke the law. And you would say, but why is there such a huge discrepancy? Well, black people must jaywalk more than white people. You would say that's an incredible claim that demands incredible evidence. And we don't see evidence of that conservatives do that. And I'll get the specifics if you like.
Well, the thing is, I think that you've got to look at it in a context, right?
This debate, again, was from June 2021 on Modern Day Debates. Chud Logic is, I believe he's British. He sounds British, but he's a left-winger. I don't know much more about his political self-identification, but I've debated him several times on panels and things of that nature.
Right, so the jaywalking thing's fine, but if we're looking at the rules of social media, like, I'm sure you would agree that stuff around indecent children, that's fine. We shouldn't have like ISIS beheading videos on the main page of Twitter, and so on and so on. There's going to be certain rules which maybe you don't like or disagree with, but you still have got to follow them to some degree, right? Like, inciting violence, that's a legal thing. Platforms have an obligation to not have illegal, illicit content on their platform. So if someone's inciting violence, it even goes beyond just being, in my opinion, about a profit motive. There's a legal requirement there for that service to remove that content so they don't break the law. So,
Okay, so let's take it inciting violence specifically. So there were conservatives that were considered to be violating inciting violence, and they were censored. Let's take the example of Carlos Maza, who worked for Vox News, Vox with a V. He's a left winger. He publicly. I'm getting some feedback here.
Feedback
from James's account.
Praise mute yourself.
Anyways, so Carlos Maza, he said, and it was reported thousands of times and was big on Twitter and other places, he suggested that we should make conservatives uncomfortable to gather in public and should do things like throw objects like milkshakes on them. Now, this is assault by any definition. He said this, it was reported, Twitter allowed this statement to stay up. They did not punish Carlos Maza. 2 days after that, journalist Andy No had milkshakes thrown at him, and there was a possibility that there were chemicals put in the milkshakes. As the milkshakes were being thrown at him, he was physically attacked.
That was the problem. There was no chemicals in the milkshake. That was not
okay.
true.
The original allegation was, doesn't matter. He was clearly assaulted, not just with the milkshakes, but with fists. And this resulted in no suspension or determination of any sort of censorship whatsoever in Carlos Maza. And if you go back and you look at the debate that Tim Pool had with Jack Dorsey, and I can't pronounce her name, Vita, or one of the people that is in charge of Twitter along with Jack Dorsey, incident after
Vijaya Gotti. We know it now, right?
Incident, Tim Pool would be able to say, here is a conservative that got censored, and yet here is a left-winger doing arguably the same thing or worse. Why didn't you censor them? And every time they're like, well, it's a judgment call.
Sure, okay. I'm just trying to bring up the tweet in question. So yeah, he said, milkshake them all, humiliate them at every turn, make them dread organizing. Yeah, I mean, I look at a tweet like that and I think that's probably unnecessary and excessive. But I think that there's a difference between something like that and the president of the United States directly calling on his followers to take specific action, around the Capitol building, which then led to that happening. I think, okay. Listen, listen, I'll be honest with you. People laugh about the Andy No thing, Yeah, I don't think Andy No should have milkshakes.
Again, notice he's just like, oh, yeah. Again, we see it over and over. Prominent lefties that have called for things like that have, people like Sarah Jung at the New York Times that was racist against white people. All of this stuff was allowed to occur over and over and over again. Now, he cites specifically Donald Trump telling people to do stuff. What did Donald Trump tell people to do? Never once did Donald Trump call for violence. He told people to peacefully protest, not just in his speech, but also on his Twitter feed. Remember, they tried to cover up the fact that Trump's tweet on January 6th was telling people to go home and to not engage in violence. But he just throws that out there, right? You can see what's going on here. He makes it, whether it be, Officer Sicknick was killed, or the conservatives just don't follow the rules, And, Democrats aren't doing the writing. Each one of these I check. I'm like, no, wrong. But you could see how, and it's funny because this is exactly what they accuse me of doing. This is what the left accused me of doing. Oh, gish galloping. I'm not saying Chud's gish galloping, but I'm saying he'll make a point and I'll point out how it's wrong. And then he's just kind of like, well, so like this Carlos Maza point, he looks at it, he's like, yeah, okay. But it's not as bad as Trump. What did Trump say? No, I'm not in camera. This is just a debate that Mondays and Tuesday I won't be on camera because I'm not at my home office. This is a debate that I did June in 2021 about our conservatives censored more. I thought with the Twitter files coming out it would be interesting to watch.
He's thrown at him, okay? But I think there's a big difference in impact, or beaten, sure, yeah, I'll happily admit that. But I think there's a big difference between that happening and the events of January 6th, So even if we say maybe this could have incited that, it's inciting a much lower instance of, the manifestation of this violence,
Well, that's not true. So there's a lot of things that are being conflated. So once we say, okay, well, it's different. So the reasons conservatives are censored more is because more violence came from the things they were saying. That's just definitively not true. We can see in the past 4 years, it's not even close to the amounts of political violence that we've seen. People committing political violence in the name of a lot of rhetoric that's being spread on social media, much of it lies, like hands up, don't shoot, and other things like that. That violence has been far more prolific than the violence that occurred January 6th. Similarly, Donald Trump never directly called for people to engage in violence or anything like that. But compare Donald Trump's statements to Maxine Waters' statements. So the eve of the Chauvin verdict, as there were riots occurring in Minneapolis, Maxine Waters actually showed up to Minneapolis and said that if they didn't get the verdict they wanted, they needed to increase the intensity of the actions they were taking. Now, Maxine Waters nor none of the people that were pushing and retweeting this on social media were censored. How is that not a more direct call to incitement?
Maxine Waters made a public statement in a speech. Okay, that isn't her using Twitter in the same way that Trump did, right? So if someone is retweeting it or commenting on it or writing a story about it, you're just writing a story of the news of what a politician said, right? It's like if I said, I hope that I'm going to go and kill X person, right? I would rightly get removed from social media for a comment like that probably. But if a news reporter came along and said, Chud Logic said he's going to go and kill X person, I wouldn't expect them to get banned because they're just reporting on a fact that happened. Maxine Waters is a distraction because she's not on social media saying these things,
Do you think
it's at the same level as Trump was.
Do you think there were people retweeting or commenting on what Maxine Waters saying yes, exactly? And if so, should they have been censored?
Well, I mean, what was her exact phrasing? What did she say?
I don't remember the exact word, but she basically said we needed to increase the intensity. Now, again, what we can see
increase the intensity. That's a different...
As riots are occurring. What did Trump say that was a call to violence? I mean, all he said was go be peaceful, exercise your rights peacefully. What did he say that was a call to violence?
Sorry, one sec. I mean, basically, sorry, go on.
Yeah, so look, we actually have studies that have been done on this. So if you don't mind, I'll read part of a study on this.
You notice, now, if I was saying, oh, Donald Trump, he called to violence. Notice when I'm talking about Maxine Waters, I'm almost able to say verbatim what she said. That I'm calling out as a potential call to violence. He keeps saying what Trump did, Trump called to violence. He can't even give you like a facsimile of what he said. And so he's like, oh, I got to look it up. Okay. If you're so confident that, well, Trump deserved to be banned because of this, grotesque call to violence, don't you think you'd have some idea of what it was? And then, of course, it turns out there was not a grotesque call to violence. In fact, it was the opposite. And we see that from the Twitter files. We know what Trump's last tweet was. He was like, go home, be peaceful.
Yeah, please go on.
Sure. So let's see. Professor Richard Hanea did a study on prominent people that had been censored leading into the 2016 election, right? And he found that there were 22 prominent people that reference politics quite often that were censored. Of the 22 that were censored, 21 of them publicly supported Donald Trump. The only one that was censored that did not support Donald Trump was Rose McGowan. And she was censored for doxing people. But other than that, 21 out of 22 people were politically censored. Now, he talks about how you could make this argument. You could say, well, maybe it's more likely that conservatives violate TOS than liberals. But mathematically, it seems beyond the pale. You would have to think that based on this data, that there were 22 prominent people that were censored and almost all of them were conservatives. You would have to say that it's something like conservatives are 21 more times likely to violate TOS than Democrats. And this is nonsense, especially given a world where you already admitted that Twitter and social media places do sometimes censor people and they get it wrong. So you're not willing to concede that giving these stark numbers, that there's a significant chance that bias influenced the type of people that they were censoring?
So I just want to go back to Trump's tweets because you mentioned there that Trump said about going in peace, right?
It didn't really. It didn't want to deal with that. All right, let's go back, Chud. Let's hear Trump's tweets.
That's what he said at the rally, sure.
Well, my understanding, based on what I'm looking at here, he said this after the events of January 6th. He talked about going home in love and peace after what had happened. So this wasn't a case of him, making an impassioned plea to people to not engage in violence. The rhetoric and his language leading up to January the 6th all pointed in a very specific direction, of...
Show me the tweet where he called for violence. I'll condemn it.
Yeah, sure, okay. But the point I'm trying to make here is that it's all very well, to after the fact say, oh well, you should go in peace and you should go in love. But if all of your rhetoric leading up to it leads to a certain point, then surely that's irrelevant then at that point.
Okay, two things. One, he did not say it after the fact. He literally said it at his rally that go there, be peaceful before the rioting started happening. So that's one. It wasn't after the fact. But second, the question of the tweets leading into that day, I didn't see one tweet whatsoever that called for violence. Not one. And what's being done here is we see that people that are on the left and that want to downplay the amount of conservatives that are being censored, they make all of these logical leaps. They say, well, what Trump was saying was lies, and that's incitement. But what we actually, why does it, let me ask you just point blank, does something have to be a lie for it to be incitement?
Well, wait. No, of course not. It doesn't have to be a lie to be incitement, does it?
Right. Okay. So that's the point.
So sorry. Just to be clear as well, because obviously you're very concerned with these Trump tweets. So basically, the reason that because you talk as well about how he said go in peace and love, and this happened after the event. The specific.
We now know from the Twitter files, by the way, which is part of the reason that I'm doing this, that even when the reason they censored Trump was garbage, and even people inside Twitter understood this does not violate our terms of service. And we know that for months leading up to it, that people had been talking, like Yoel Roth and Vijay Gotti, etc., about wanting to get Trump off of the platform. And we know that there was pressure from Democrats to want Trump to get off there. So we could see that it's just abject nonsense. He's reaching here. He's like, well, because people interpreted it. He's claiming that people interpreted Trump's words, that it was sort of a wink and a nod. And so because they interpreted it and went out and did violence, therefore Trump deserves to be banned. But by the same logic, then I could say, okay, well then people that heard hands up, don't shoot, which was untrue, that then went out and committed violence, therefore we should remove anyone who says hands up, don't shoot, because that's a wink and a nod to go commit violence. I would be against that. Chud would be against that. So the double standard is obvious that he's employing here.
Tweet that ended up getting him banned was the 75 million great American patriots who voted for me, America first and make America great again. Will have a giant voice long into the future. They'll not be disrespected or treated unfairly in any way, shape or form. And then he went on to tweet, to all of those who have asked, I will not be going to the inauguration on January 20th. And this is, following a long period in which he's tweeted a variety of things that whipped his followers up into a frenzy, which led to the results of January 6th. So this is the thing that ended up getting him banned from Twitter. Basically, he showed no remorse. He didn't show any willingness to back down from his position that had led to these events.
This again,
and that's what led to his inevitable ban from the social media platform as well. Because obviously, you're very concerned with these Trump tweets.
Here's what he says
so
about the tweets.
Basically, the reason that because you talk as well about how he said go in peace and love, and this happened after the event. The specific tweet that ended up getting him banned was the 75 million great American patriots who voted for me, America first and make America great again. Will have a giant voice long into the future. They'll not be disrespected or treated unfairly in any way, shape or form. And then he went on to tweet, to all of those who have asked, I will not be going to the inauguration on January 20th. And this is, following a long period in which he's tweeted.
Now, those are the two tweets that he's like, well, this is why he got banned. Because he said, the people that voted for me won't be disrespected, and I'm not going to the inauguration. That's it. That's what this guy's sitting here trying to say. Well, this was a ridiculous call to violence. That was justification. It's nonsense.
A variety of things that whipped his followers up into a frenzy, which led to the results of January 6th. So this is the thing that ended up getting him banned from Twitter. Basically, he showed no remorse. He didn't show any
now he didn't show remorse.
His position that had led to these events, and that's what led to his inevitable ban from these social media platforms.
It's not. Let me read again, like what you just said. He got banned for the following statement: the 75 million great American patriots who voted for me, America first, and make America great again, will have a giant voice long into the future. They will not be disrespected or treated unfairly in any way, shape, or form. To all those who have asked, I will not be going to the inauguration. That's it. That's why they banned the president of the United States. Now, leaders of China that have talked about downplaying their enslavement of Uyghur Muslims, Louis Farrakhan and racists like that have called for violence, called Jews insects after the Pittsburgh synagogue shooter, that have called for a black nation, that have called for black nationalism and the demonization of white people, leaders of Iran and other places like that, leaders of Antifa that blatantly called for violence. All of their platforms are allowed to stay. But Donald Trump tweeting, the nail in the coffin was when he tweeted, "I won't go to Biden's inauguration." This is nonsense. And we could see that what happens is, again, let's go back to my question. You said, no, it doesn't have to be a lie in order to be incitement. Okay.
But
was there more damage?
What you're missing though, and this is why it's difficult. This is why it's so difficult, these conversations, right? Basically, Trump's pattern of tweeting and his speeches, led to certain conclusions. It's very difficult to pinpoint a tweet and say, this is it. This is the one tweet where he's done the thing, because his rhetoric and his words and his tweets and his communications slowly built this kind of movement of people who went and perpetrated these acts. It's quite tricky to point to an individual tweet and say, there it is, that's the incitement of violence. It was done insidiously over a period of time. And that's why his ban, you've got to look at it in the broader context.
It's nonsense. And if we give these people, it's clearly biased and influencing that, because we've seen, again, it is undisputable that the violence politically that we saw from the left in the past year far surpassed any of the violence we saw from the right. And you might say, but the people that were tweeting things that led to that incitement were tweeting things that were true. For example, Kamala Harris publicly tweeted a bail fund for the people that were burning down the police barracks in Minneapolis and the people that were arrested for rioting in Minneapolis. The future vice president tweeted a bail fund for that. She wasn't removed for promotion of violence.
Wait, before you go off on a million points, how is tweeting out a bail fund? What's that got to do with promoting violence?
Did she say because what does saying that I'm not going to attend Joe Biden's inauguration have to do with promotion of violence?
The reason that particular tweet. Sorry, go on.
If I could just interject real quick, because
so according to Chud Logic, Donald Trump saying, "I'm not going to go to Biden's inauguration," that's leading to violence. But when a bunch of people burn down a police precinct and riot, and Kamala Harris says, "Here's a bail fund to get people out of jail that were there," that's not promotion of violence. I mean, you could clearly see. And again, this is what so many people, when you have all of these institutions that share your sort of ideological bent, or at least claim to, and they're on your side, this is the sort of double standards that you could get away with. This is why people like Destiny or Vosh don't want to debate me. Because I'm not going to fall for that garbage. And I'm going to point out this sort of absurdity of it. So they want low-hanging fruit. They want to stay in their bubble, like I'm really important said. Or they want to debate right-wingers that they could call racist or something like that. But they don't want to debate me. And you can see it's not going well for Chud here. He just has to repeat. Now, I would say deep down, Chud knows that this is garbage. If you took the politics out of it and you said, okay, two situations. One, there's violence, there's a riot, there's attacks on a police precinct where it's burnt down, and someone tweets out a bail fund to get those people out of jail. Or second, someone says, I'm not going to go to an inauguration of my opponent. Which one is more lip service to violence? It's not even close. And yet he's going to sit here and try to argue with a straight face. Actually, what Trump did was a call to violence, or he deserved to be censored, but not Kamala.
We're about halfway through the debate here, the open discussion format, and we're going to have 30 minutes of Q&A following that. So I just want to remind everybody in the chat to send in their super chats so that they can get their questions read and get them on top priority, and tag me at Modern Day Debate or at Factitionalist Network if you have another question. They won't be read first, but if we don't have enough super chats, they'll be read anyways. And don't forget to like and subscribe and smash that like button. And the guests are linked in the description below. And sorry for the interruption, guys. Continue on, please.
No, that's okay. So let me just explain. So the context of this is a lengthy period of time over months in which the viability or the election was called into question repeatedly by Trump. Okay, so the reason for this was considered something violence is basically more or less twofold. The first is Trump not attending the inauguration was considered a sign of his seeing a lack of legitimacy in it, and the second aspect is it's kind of a wink and a nod to his followers of I'm not going to be at the inauguration. So if you go and tear shit up, I'm not going to be there. Obviously, the difficulty is, Trump didn't come out and say explicitly, oh, yes, go and do this action, because obviously he knows that he can't do that. So he's got to.
And see, you can already see the problem. Now, keep in mind what the greater context of this debate is. Are conservatives censored more? And so he's admitting, yes, they are, but they deserve it. And then when you get into the actual literal, like, using the biggest example of Trump, he's like, well, it's because I feel that he was, quote, winking and nodding. And so they'll always be able to justify. It's like when I debate Pisco, right? And Pisco will say, well, when it came to Joe Biden's quid pro quo, we can't understand what the operation of his mind was. It's literally impossible to know exactly what he was thinking. And when it comes to Paul Gambetta deleting subpoenaed evidence, we don't know exactly what he was thinking. And when it comes to Hillary Clinton saying, I thought that the lettering on documents was alphabetical order, not classification markings, we can't literally know what she was thinking. And then when you're like, okay, well, what about the impeachment of Trump for his alleged quid pro quo? Oh yeah, we know what he was thinking. We know what he was doing. We know his motivations were bad. When you have people like that are in these positions to censor people off these huge platforms, you can start to see the problem. Because their bias will always be, well, the people we don't like will choose to look and say, we understand what they really meant. Sure, their literal words didn't violate the TOS, but we know what they really meant, so we're justified in censoring them. That's in addition to now the Twitter files showing that we know that the government was involved in working with these social media platforms to do this sort of censorship.
Working hints and stuff like that.
So let me just ask you a question to see if this is equally applied. Would you hold the same logic to AOC? Hasn't her record of all the things she said and tweeted and talked about on Instagram and Twitch and other places like that, hasn't it talked about how horribly systemic racist this country is in an environment where people are rioting because of systemic racism? So does that mean she's winking and nodding to calls to violence?
I mean, I guess we could look at the tweets, but I don't see anything of the same level or the same significance as what Trump was doing. No, not that I've seen anyway.
I mean, so we'll get off the Trump thing. Like, it's not just Trump. Like, we see, real quick, another prominent person I want to talk about. We see right-wingers that are censored for claims of things that they claim are racial things, even if oftentimes they're ambiguous and they're not blatant calls to racism. Meanwhile, we see former New York Times, or maybe current New York Times, reporter Sarah Jung, have tweet after tweet about how all white people are evil and we need to go against white people and violent things she'd like to do against white people. This was brought the attention to Twitter, which is blatantly against their terms of service of racism, and yet she was allowed to remain. Can you explain why that's the case?
Okay, what's this tweet? I mean, I can look at it.
Sarah Young, right?
I've not. I mean, I'm not on board with all white people are this or white people are that. I'm against essentialist takes. But yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, the only thing I would say is that my understanding is this, because there was always this thing of, if you put in about black people, you get banned. If you put in white people, you get banned. My understanding currently is if you tweet out anything regarding a race, you want to harm a certain race or something like that, you can, regardless of whether it's against white people or whatever, you can receive consequences for that. You can be suspended. Your account can be banned. So, I mean,
okay. So again, these mishaps, and I think, we'll leave it to the audience. That's all we could do as people that are debating. But the idea that we're okay banning Donald Trump for saying I'm not going to attend a rally, because even though he never had a call for violence,
wasn't just for that though.
Right. So it was for him questioning the election, right? Now, when the Democrats questioned the election, or they talked about racism, or they said that Trump was a spy, and we saw violence as a result of that, no problem. None of them got censored. Even when they pushed things that were blatant lies like hands up, don't shoot. That was a lie that's still being pushed that literally led to riots that even Eric Holder's Justice Department said was a lie. And that's been tweeted over and over.
Let me just ask, off the back of this stuff you're talking about, was there a future armed protest being planned or proliferating? Was this a thing that was happening?
Yes. There were massive riots in Ferguson around the country, and Michael Brown was shot. Even after those riots occurred. I mean, for God's sakes, we saw someone murder 5 police officers at a Black Lives Matter rally in Dallas in 2018. And this was all based on a lie that the Eric Holder Justice Department proved was a lie. I mean, no one got censored. People to this day tweet hands up, don't shoot. That is a lie that led to violence, and they don't get censored for saying it. They don't.
The thing is, okay, I'm aware that the hands up, don't shoot thing was not accurate, from my understanding of looking at the case. However, I think it's a bit of a stretch to say just tweeting that out, even erroneously, is somehow a call to violence. If anything, to me, that is a call to say.
Right, which is exactly my point. Now, do you see what I'm talking about, the double standard? Well, Trump's saying I'm not going to his inauguration. I could look at the operation of Trump's mind and know what he's really saying there is, the election was stolen from me, you need to go engage in violence, right? Because we see the end result was there was a riot on January 6th. But when people are tweeting out, hands up, don't shoot, which is a lie, and there are actual people based on that lie going out and committing violence, I don't think that that's what was going on there. Do you see? Now imagine Chud working at Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or Google or, any of the subsidiaries like YouTube or Twitch. That's the type of mentality that's going on in these places. In addition, you have the government rewarding these people when they censor people that are critical of them and threatening to punish them if they don't. All of this has been revealed by the Twitter files. And so basically Chud's entire defense this debate is, which the debate was, are conservatives censored more, is, yeah, but they deserve it. And then when I'm like, well, can you show me why they deserve it? He's just like, well, I feel like it. Even though they technically didn't say this stuff, I feel they were dog whistling. And then when I'm like, well, what if we apply the same standard to the other side? He goes, nah, I don't feel that that's bad.
Okay, well, like it's a call for the reduction of violence by the police, if you like, rather than being a call to act violently. Personally,
this is nonsense. People engaged in violence incited by that motto. That motto has been discredited, and people know that the motto is a lie and that it led to violence, and yet they still talk about it. And we say, oh, that should be allowed to stay. That's not a call to violence. But Trump saying that he wouldn't attend an inauguration, that's a dog whistle to call to violence.
But
this is the double standard that I'm talking about. And real quick, I just want to make this point to everyone. You're not debating whether or not more conservatives are being censored or not. You're just saying, well, they must have broke the rules more. And this is the type of thing we're saying.
Sure, but you've got to contextualize it, right? Because if let's say a bunch of conservatives got taken off Twitter, and it transpired that a lot of them were sharing indecent images of children or sharing ISIS beheading videos, well, you go, well, they broke the rules explicitly, so that makes sense. So that's why it's important to contextualize this, because
But again, I already cited a study that showed 21 of 22 prominent voices that were censored going into the 2016 election were Trump supporters, right? And we know none of them were banned for showing inappropriate videos, etc. Again, I had three types of categories I was talking about. One, regular people being censored more that are conservative or anti-establishment. Second, prominent people. And third, the types of arguments that you can and can't talk about. And so for him to just wave it away and say, well, for all we know, they were all putting up, horrible images of children, is nonsense. He has no proof for that claim. And again, we have proof for what many of them were being censored for, questioning the election, people like Donald Trump. We're going through the specifics, and yet when we talk about the mass amount of conservatives that are being censored, he just hand waves and says, well, it could be that they did X. But you can justify any double standard that way. Well, we don't know. Maybe all the conservatives that are targeted by the FBI, maybe they're all in, trafficking of children. Maybe. We don't know. Oh, well, I guess that's that. No problem then. It's clearly nonsense. And now that we're looking back on it, again, this was from June 2021, this debate. Now that we're looking back on it, we could see via the Twitter files that we now know that Twitter was working with government officials to censor people, not because they were trafficking. In fact, one of the things Twitter didn't do a very good job of was removing child pornography from their website. Instead, they were worried about working with the FBI to remove people that were telling jokes, or remove people that were asking about the origins of COVID, or remove people that were discussing the policies in Ukraine, or that were discussing chain of custody issues with ballots. So his only defense here, which is, well, maybe all of these hundreds of thousands of conservatives that were censored, maybe they were doing horrible things like, child trafficking. Well, we now know that's not true from the Twitter files. You think Chud Logic said, oh, my bad, I was so wrong about that? I doubt it.
It makes it's irrelevant that the pure numbers or the raw numbers. It's about, are these people engaging in behavior which is in breach of the rules? And I think it's important to contextualize that. Do you not agree?
It's just, again, but you're conflating. You're talking about a hypothetical. We're talking about the literal situation of what happened. Yeah, if people were placing beheading videos, sure, then I guess they've clearly violated terms of service. What we're talking about is, one, we are in agreement that conservatives were censored more. The question now is, did they deserve to be censored more? And so we're talking about, you're saying, well, it wasn't a direct call for violence, but Trump should have been censored because it was clearly a dog whistle. So when we're talking about things that were factually incorrect that led to violence that are still promoted by left-wingers on Twitter and them not being punished for it, what is the standard of which Twitter is using to say, oh, well, you can't say things that we think are untrue that people might go out and engage in violence? But it seems like when left-wingers do it, it's no problem.
Yeah, sure. I guess the issue I've got here is you're trying to claim that these kind of esoteric principles or concepts or, even a phrase like hands up, don't shoot, which is in itself, I've got my hands up, don't shoot me. That is a rejection of violence. That's saying don't engage in violence because I'm not a threat. But you're trying to paint that as, in some way the same as this context that I've mentioned of, Trump's social media presence from the outcome of the 2020 election through to January. And I just think that those are two very different things.
Again, all I could say is it's absurd. Like, it seems, if I'm trying to be as objective as possible, that you are stretching as far as you can to say, well, clearly Trump's dog whistling to violence. And then you're stretching as far as you can to say, yes, even though people were spreading a motto that was largely used to encourage riots around this country, or it was largely used, I don't want to say to encourage, it was largely used by people rioting, and it was definitively debunked, and people are still using it. Well, I'm not considering that a call to violence. And we see this all the time. Twitter claims that they censor fake news, or social media claims they censor fake news. And yet the president of the United States, Joe Biden, and thousands upon thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of Democrats have routinely said that Donald Trump said Nazis were good people. He never did. Now, what do you think happens? Do you think that there could potentially be violence if someone is spreading a lie that the president of the United States said Nazis are good people? Don't you think that people could interpret that lie saying, holy shit, I have to fight back against a president that's defending Nazis?
I mean, that sure, there's a possibility of anything inciting anyone. I mean, you know, the guy that tried to kill Bjork was influenced by a music or something. I can't remember the details. So anything can influence anyone. But I guess what I would look at is like, well, what are the outcomes of what's happening? And I mean, I think there maybe were a couple of attempts on the president's life. I'm not sure if that's in excess to other presidents or not. But I don't think that actually formulated in real life violence against the president or attempts of violence against the president. You know, conservatives made a big deal. Was it Kathy Young who had the beheaded head of Trump, which I think was a kind of cringy gesture? Oh, sorry,
I agree. I have no problem with it.
Yeah, yeah, sure. But I think, you know, you might support it for a free speech. I probably do too. But it's a cringy kind of sure. thing. But I think that, like, I don't think that led to people trying to then go and behead Trump. Whereas if you look at the rhetoric of Trump and what he was talking about, that led to actual outcomes of he consistently called into question the outcome of the election. And then Trump supporters went and tried to interfere with the electoral process off the back of all of that propaganda.
Again, we're back to hands up, don't shoot. It wasn't a call for peace. What it was an implication that a black man was shot by a racist police officer who was trying to give himself up and he was executed. That was a lie. It didn't happen like that. And it was a lie that led to people rioting. And that lie was still pushed. So again, you saying, oh, well, Trump was saying things that led to a bad outcome. Therefore, Trump and conservatives need to be censored. Again, we already articulated that it was far less than 1% of the people at the Capitol that engaged in this violence, right? Far less than that. So hundreds of thousands of people had questions about the election. To censor all of them is ridiculous. When we can see commiserate things on the left that led to violence, again, it's not debatable that there was more left-wing violence in the past year than right-wing violence. And yet we don't censor anyone for inciting that left-wing violence. Why is that?
I mean, just to be clear on one point, you keep saying, you know, I think Trump should have been censored. Just to make my position clear, I don't think personally Trump should have been banned, only because he was a world leader at the time. You know, and I think that his position meant he should have remained on Twitter. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I think you're looking at this like from the perspective of,
I mean, he just doesn't have an argument. Is that evident to everyone? It's just like, well, yeah, maybe Trump shouldn't have been banned. You know, I don't know. Yeah, I guess conservatives do get banned more, but maybe they did bad stuff. I don't have proof for it. You know, and I don't remember, again, this debate was June 2021, so a year and a half ago. I don't remember exactly what we all get to, but think of the implications of that. What happens when you ban certain ideologies on prolific platforms that control so much of our public discourse? Professor Robert Epstein said Google's algorithms alone could sway 16 million votes in the 2020 election. So, to come into this debate, Chud said, oh, conservatives are just whiners and complainers and conspiracy theorists. How's that looking right now? One, in the debate, where he's basically backtracking all over the place. And second, now that the Twitter files have came out.
What caused, for example, the last year, the protests around the George Floyd murder were people witnessing Derek Chauvin murdering George Floyd on video and seeing it and getting frustrated and angry and then going out and taking action off the back of it. There wasn't like, you know, a certain group of people that were saying, yes, you must go out and do these protests and, you know,
sure there
you
was.
must go and
Sure
yeah, but not. Okay, but the thing is, there wasn't a sort of a significant pointed action there to like go and target democracy or go and target a certain government building. It was more broad organizing to engage in protests, you know, which were designed to... And also, there were statistics that showed that there were a high percentage, I think 93% of the protests around Black Lives Matter were actually peaceful last year. But
cool. How many percent of the protests around the election were violent?
I mean...
Name me the incidents that were violent of people that were questioning election results.
Yeah, but the thing is like how many protests were there around the election compared to how many protests there were during Black Lives Matter?
Sure. So we look at the percentage of them. There were thousands of protests about the election. There was one in my little town. There was a Black Lives Matter rally in my little town as well. And there was one incident of violence. There were 233 locations of violence surrounding Black Lives Matter. But a location means that if multiple acts of violence occurred in one location, it only counts as one. For example, we saw 90 straight days of rioting in Portland. Many of the times, the people that were rioting in Portland actually used social media to communicate with each other to talk about specific tactics that they were going to use that night to riot. Those social media accounts remain.
Sure, but I don't think that's the same as the president inciting violence in the people that follow him.
He didn't incite. So just a couple other things. So we'll move away from Trump. What do you say about like another example of a person? Like, so for example, we had a governor in the form of Ron DeSantis who was talking to medical professionals that was justifying his ending of the lockdown. That conversation was removed from YouTube and other social media places. Why is that?
I mean, I presume that was probably because of YouTube's policy on medical misinformation. I think that.
But he was right.
I mean, if he was right and it was a mistake, then yeah, YouTube have messed up. I think that.
Okay. Can you name me a left-wing person?
But just to be clear,
we now know from the Twitter files that the government was actively engaged in censoring people, even people like Ron DeSantis and actual doctors that were questioning their establishment narrative on COVID. Now, you've seen me talk about COVID enough that I don't have to tell you how many times the establishment narrative was wrong. Just for starters, where did the virus come from? We were told it was debunked. It was racist to suggest that it came from a lab in China. That's racism. To suggest that the United States could have partially funded this lab in China and then they could have created this virus. That's racism. Instead, we have to believe that a bunch of backwards Chinese people that don't have good hygiene were eating weird animals and spread the disease. It's racist to assume that, Chinese people could have scientists and doing stuff. That's racism. We have to assume they're backwards people eating animals. Strange animals. That's how stupid it was. And yet, they censored people. We now know through the Twitter files that was actively encouraged and coerced through the United States government. And so again, on each issue of this, on the average people being censored, Chud has no defense. He's just like, well, maybe they were doing bad stuff. Maybe they were breaking TOS. On the specific people, every single time he's like, well, I assume it was a dog whistle, but when we look at it on the left, I assume that they meant good when they said it. And now when we're talking about specific issues, like, well, what about, prominent governor like DeSantis, his conversation with doctors being pulled? Well, it must have violated medical misinformation.
I don't know the ins and outs of this event, so I don't know what they were saying. I don't know the details of it. All I can go off is by what you're talking about here. So, I mean, without seeing the conversation or knowing the context and the medical stuff around it,
Well, but that might be a reason that maybe you're wrong in this debate. Again, you're already conceding that more conservatives are censored. You're just saying they probably deserve it. You're not providing any evidence to show that. Now,
the problem you've got is you're jumping around all these different examples, and like some of it.
We spent an awful lot of time on Trump.
DeSantis,
you don't want to just focus on that, right?
No, sure, but you're expecting me to know about the intricacies of a conversation some fucking governor had. This is the problem with arguing with fucking right-wing conservatives and it's fine if you only know about American stuff. That's cool, but it's always focused so much on America and what's happening in America. Most people don't give a fuck about Roger DeSantis. Okay, I don't know why you're so fucking focused on.
He hasn't given one example, not one. Now, what I'm talking about were prominent people in the United States. It happens to be where I'm from, because my concern is how could this have an effect on our culture and our elections? But he's more than welcome to bring up examples if he sees fit. Every example I bring up, he's like, well, I guess.
Whatever this guy's name is, I don't know.
Because the focus is, there's three ways that we look at this. So the first way we could look at it is, were there more average people that are right-wing, that were conservative, that were censored? Yes, we've agreed. You just said they probably observed it. Then we're talking about prominent people that were censored. So I read a study that showed that going into the 2016 election in this country, that 21 out of 22 people that were censored were Donald Trump supporters. This is media professionals, pundits, journalists, things like that. There were 22 that were censored on Twitter, and 21 of them were Trump supporters, right? You don't really have an answer for that. You just say, well, they must have violated terms of service.
Well, I mean, I don't know the details of the reasons that they were banned. I'm not beholden to this position to say, if someone was unfairly banned, I'm going to be like, well, they were conservative, so they probably deserved it. To look at the totality of what someone said, like I say, I've been affected personally.
If I can, just real quick, the way the debate works, you're taking the position, you're literally saying, I understand more conservatives were banned. You're not disputing, you're not providing counter evidence. You're not saying, no, actually that study was incorrect. You're just saying, well, I don't know, but I still guess that they probably deserve to be censored. That's not really an argument.
Well, no, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that in cases that I'm familiar with, say prominent conservative figures, what you tend to find is there are specific named reasons that these people are banned from social media platforms. The fact that you can bring up examples of people I'm not as familiar with, I don't know the totality of everyone that's ever been banned from social media. All I can go.
But again, he hasn't given anyone other than Trump. And then when he read the tweets, he's like, well, Trump got banned for saying he wouldn't attend Biden's inauguration. I assume that was a dog whistle when you see that tweets he had before then were questioning the election results. I assume that was a dog whistle to violence. But then I'm like, okay, well, we could see that the people at Twitter weren't making that same assumption when it came to left-wingers that were saying things that were then used to go out and commit violence. I mean, it's just, he's provided no evidence. He's lost on every single example that we've talked about. He has not provided one example to prove his point that it's just right-wingers are conspiracy theorist whiners, that they're not being censored more. He just says, well, if they're censored, I assume they deserved it.
By is, what I know and from what I understand, when people are banned permanently, it tends to be quite a significant reason for that. And the other thing as well is you're conflating a lot of things here. You're talking about a single conversation getting removed from YouTube. I don't know, maybe that was the right decision, maybe it was the wrong decision, but that's different to being banned permanently. I've had videos removed from YouTube. I just, I think that pointing to one case where a conversation of a video has been removed, yeah, sure, I've had videos removed. Like, I know other lefties that have had videos removed. I know lefties that have been demonetized. I know lefties that have been banned from like Twitter. Like, it's all just anecdotes of like, this person's banned, that person's banned. Whereas I don't think the broad totality of the evidence that we've got, points to the thing that you're saying.
And by the way, everything that I'm saying, I put much of this in chat. If you ask for any of the studies that I'm citing or anything like that, no problem, I can provide them for you, Chud. We're not just talking about anecdotal evidence. We're talking about specific evidences of hypocrisy. We're talking about the data that shows how many people have been censored. And just brushing this off as, well, it's just right-wingers complaining. Clearly, the data shows that right-wingers are censored more. And you're just on a wing and a prayer saying, I have a gut feeling. We also have a lawsuit. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's interesting that you mentioned all this data that you've got, because there was a study that was conducted by New York University into the specific question of whether right-wingers are being, censored unduly or whatever.
This study from New York University was one of the most asinine things you'll ever see. It basically relied on the people at these social media places self-reporting. And they're like, oh, no, actually, we censor left-wingers more. Well, now we know from the Twitter files that's garbage. So has anyone contacted New York University and asked it how they got their study so wrong? Because we could see from the Twitter files that actually the government was talking with Twitter that had an ideological bent to go after people that were conservative and questioning the establishment orthodoxy and arguments and topics that were questioning it. So how was this New York study so wrong? Interesting, huh?
On social media, and it made the claim, and I agree with it, that the data is quite lacking, in terms of like understanding, because Twitter, Facebook, etc. Obviously, they keep their cards quite close to their chest. So there's not actually a huge amount of data that demonstrates this person was banned for this reason, And as a data thing, it tends to be more anecdotal, where someone says, "Oh, I got banned from Twitter for this reason," "Oh, I got banned from Twitter for that reason." So I'm just interested. Where's this data that you speak of? Because this New York University study didn't seem to find it.
Right. So two things. One, I put the Quillette study, which it's in the chat, and I think I put it in the chat with you, which talked about the 22 people that were censored. You can see the methodology and things like that they used in the study. Let me find it again. I just posted it in the chat though. Secondly, the New York University study, first, it was compiled by Craig Newmark, who's a billionaire tech titan that actually donated to Biden. Second, here's the most important line that we see within this study, and I'm quoting, "The question of whether social media companies harbor an anti-conservative bias can't be answered conclusively because the data available in academic and civil society research aren't sufficiently detailed. Existing periodic enforcement disclosures by Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube are helpful, but not granular enough to allow thorough analysis by outliers. However, this study was touted and was titled to say, false accusation, the unfounded claim that social media companies censor conservatives. Within that document that was founded by a prolific, multi-billionaire Democrat and donator to Joe Biden, they admit, actually, we don't have the data to prove that's unfounded. Now, I could provide you links to people that were whistleblowers in places like Facebook that were told that they had a culture of censoring conservative. We can see that the data clearly shows that the people that are working at these companies clearly have a bias in the forms that they donate. So again, and what we're saying is...
Well, just to be clear.
So again, I think that it's striking. Sometimes I impress even myself. He finally cites one piece of evidence, and it's this study, and I know more about the study than him. Right, because I was interested when this study came out. And it says nothing. Well, now we do have the evidence. We see from the Twitter files. Whoops. And remember, the argument they have now is, well, the reason that almost no one in the media is covering it and the left-wingers don't care, they say, well, this is nothing we didn't already know. You could see that there were people doing studies, prominent left-wingers were doing studies, people like Chud and many other people were saying, no, there's no proof. There's no proof conservatives are being censored more. And now their argument is, well, we already all knew this. Yeah, that's right. The FBI paid Twitter and presumably other social media companies to have these interactions where they suggested that conservatives and people questioning the establishment were censored.
I will fully admit that these big tech platforms have got a liberal bias, and I would not be surprised to see them donating to democratic causes, more so than conservative ones. But, pointing to something like Facebook, where there's information that tells us that a lot of the news stories that are popular on Facebook on a day-to-day basis tend to be from right-wing sources, like Ben Shapiro, Dan Bongino, is that the guy's name, I think?
Sure, that's...
Yeah. So, I think that, pointing to something like Facebook isn't necessarily going to be the best way to do it, because there's evidence that demonstrates that conservative news sources are fairly popular on there.
But that's different. Saying that conservatives. So again, one of the reasons that conservatives tended to migrate towards social media was because there's such a bias against conservatives in traditional forms of media. So saying there's a lot of conservatives on Facebook, therefore they can't be, when whistleblowers come out and say, actually, we're being instructed to censor certain conservative posts, that doesn't prove that censorship's not being directed. Again, there's still a lot of conservatives that use Twitter, but that doesn't dispute the fact that we saw over 200,000 censored about the election.
But if you've got a lot of conservatives on a platform consuming news, this news to push these news stories to the top, it just kind of goes against this narrative that there's all these significant amounts of conservatives being banned. Also, you mentioned
Lecter Protector says, were they banned because they were conservatives, or they incited to violence or threat to the government or something? No, they didn't incite to. If you read the Twitter files, nothing in the Twitter files says that they were only banning people that were inciting. They were banning people that were questioning the origins of COVID. They were banning people that were questioning lockdowns. They were banning people that were questioning our strategy with Ukraine. They were banning people that were questioning chain of custody issues on ballots. They were targeting specific people that never once incited violence or anything like this. All of this has came out in the Twitter files. And again, you're just repeating the argument that Chud Logic. Well, who cares if a bunch of conservatives, for all we know, they were calling for violence and that's why they got censored. That's not what happened. And we now see proof of that through the Twitter files.
You mentioned this figure. I've actually got a figure here. So in the first half of 2020, the most recent period for which Twitter has released enforcement statistics, the company suspended approximately 926,700 accounts. Much of this growth was driven by a 68% increase in suspensions related to child sexual exploitation. So I'm just wondering if you think that, is that conservatives that just happen to be doing child sexual exploitation? Is that linked somehow? Maybe, I don't know.
It's a red herring. This has nothing to do. Just because even if 90% of the people that were censored were for child sex, that's not the percentage we're talking about. We're talking about the other 10% that were censored for other things, whether there is a bias to go against conservatives. And you're not making any arguments as to why that's not the case. In addition to this, so I linked to you a study from a lawsuit that has official documentation that talks about in California, and I believe there's a lawsuit out of Michigan, both of which suggest that the Office of Election Counsels have worked hand in hand with Twitter and creating Twitter's policies to censor information that they think is critical of the election, to the point where there's actual direct communications from people that run Twitter to people that work in state agencies. When the state agencies say, we think that this person is questioning the election and they should be censored. Oftentimes this censorship occurs within 24 hours when Democrats in the Office of Election Counsel actually points out to Twitter itself. There are official back channels that go from Twitter and the Office of Election Counsel. So this is literally, and I provided that.
Again, this was June 2021, a year and a half ago. I was looking at lawsuits that were showing exactly what the Twitter files are now proving. That there were back channels, it's called teleporter, from government agencies, even at the local levels, but certainly as high up as the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI, straight to people at Twitter, like Yoel Roth, that were saying, we want you to remove these posts, and Twitter was complying many of the times. There were lawsuits alleging this way back 18 months ago, which I was talking about. No one wanted to listen to it. That's why the Twitter files were so important. Because they proved what people like me had known all along. Now, the left argument is, well, we already knew this. A lot of the censorship was happening under Trump's watch. Yeah, a lot of the censorship going into the 2020 election was under Trump's watch. Because his FBI, that wasn't really his FBI, much like almost all of the institutions that were supposedly operating under him from the executive branch, like the Department of State, the FBI, they were rogue. They were actively trying to sabotage him.
Link to you.
Okay, I mean, obviously, no, that's okay, because you're throwing a lot of stuff, which is fair enough.
One second, guys. I'm sorry. I had a technical issue. I had to restart my whole computer and everything. So I've been offline for a second. So if anybody had sent any questions that were not super chats in the last couple minutes while I was off screen, please resend them because I did not see them. If you had any super chats, they will be sent to me before the stream is over. So I will be able to see those. But if you had any other questions, please resend them now. I'm back in the chat now. We have about 5 more minutes left in the debate. Okay. So please continue. Go ahead.
Okay. So the list of 22 people, obviously I'm having a quick look now, includes people like Richard Spencer and Mike Enoch. So you claiming those on your side? Those are,
they're considered
free speech.
Right-wing.
They're free speech. What about free speech legends? Are they trying to?
No, they're considered right wing. There's left wing equivalents like Louis Farrakhan. Was he censored? He was allowed to push his race hatred, which someone parroting his logic murdered how many Jews at a Pittsburgh synagogue.
I mean,
One week
real quick.
1 week before that murder occurred at a Pittsburgh synagogue, Louis Farrakhan was out there talking about how Jews are like termites, and his channel's allowed to stay.
Well, the problem I've got, and you know, I know what probable response is going to come from this. I wouldn't consider that fella to be left wing myself. I believe he's Nation of Islam, right, which is an essentialist. Anyway, that's besides the point. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'd look at it and go, yeah, he should have been banned. But I don't know the material of these tweets. Like, you know, I don't know.
All right,
and you know, the problem as well, you know, because you're talking about like Richard Spencer, like he's still on fucking Twitter. Like, what's the problem with Richard Spencer? What happened to him? Did you get a few tweets deleted or something? Like, what do you mean?
Many of them got censored, particularly around the times of the election. The most important issue that we haven't talked about, real quick, because we only have 5 minutes, and I want to say this, is censorship in the name of eliminating fake news around the time of the election that was directed towards helping Joe Biden and the Democrats. For example, the oldest newspaper in this country, the New York Post, was censored for accurately reporting a story about Hunter and Joe Biden getting money from the communist government of China and a laptop that was found. That was considered a conspiracy. 2 weeks before the election, that the New York Post was censored from social media. People trying to push that story were censored from social media. A Rasmussen poll said that 1/3 of Democrats said had they been aware of that story at the time that they voted, that they would not have voted for Joe Biden. So that was directly these places operating to, and real quick, Robert Epstein, a professor, talked about how these sort of things and algorithms and things like that had the ability to sway 16 million votes in the 2020 election alone.
Okay.
And he anticipates that this sort of stuff swayed 2.6 million votes in the 2016 election for Hillary Clinton.
Okay, so I'm glad you mentioned that. I actually, at the time, criticized Twitter heavily for censoring that article. It's good, really, though, because after, I believe a day or two, Twitter realized they'd made a mistake and they rescinded it and they allowed the... Yes, it is. They
did so after the election.
It wasn't after the election.
Yes, they did.
No, I don't think it was after the election. It was a couple of days after it happened. I can't remember the exact dates off the top of my head. But yeah, I don't think it was after the...
It's just more blatantly false information from Chud Logic. I mean, again, in every one of the specific examples that's brought up, he's like, well, I guess that's not good. Well, I guess that's not good. Well, I guess that's not good.
The election, it was within, I think the New York Post, my understanding is I believe they had some issues with their Twitter account ongoing, but the article itself, Twitter released a press release and said, yeah, we made a mistake on this one. We shouldn't have blocked this. And then you could share it on social media.
That's not true. This is from the New York Post. Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey Wednesday falsely told Senator that his company lifted a ban on users tweeting articles from the post-Hunter Biden
Well, 1 minute.
Despite anyone could tweet these articles, he said. But Twitter users noted quickly that the social media network still banned the distribution of the Post article describing a business proposal in China. Jack Dorsey of Twitter just told Senator Cruz that anyone could share the New York Post bombshell tweet. Dorsey is lying, tweeted Abigail Marone. He lied.
That's a different story, though. I mean, I don't know the details of the second story, but that's
the same story. The Hunter Biden. That's what it says.
About his laptop. That was about his laptop and the contents of his laptop.
Correct. Again, that's exactly what this is talking about. About Hunter Biden and a document indicating a 10% set aside for the big guy. That was the article. Like, this was clearly done. Again,
and you might say the 31st of October.
That he literally testified.
And then my post stand off over Hunter Biden. I don't know.
They tried.
Let's go ahead and wrap it up, guys.
Okay.
30th of October, New York Post was back on Twitter.
They were never kicked off Twitter. This article was kicked off Twitter, and people that were pushing.
No, you got it wrong. Their account was, they couldn't post on their account. But on the 30th of October, there's a tweet here saying, yeah, that was when it was released. So it was before the election.
Again, they intentionally tried to.
What had happened was, to clarify, I understand what Chud's saying. They allowed the New York Post to come back on Twitter, but did not allow the article or reporting about the laptop. So this will happen. They'll say, you are banned from Twitter until you delete the offending tweet. And so they allowed the New York Post on, but did not allow conversation about the laptop story.
At a time when this was important, censor this information. The election occurred in early November. So the fact that they censored this for over 2 weeks and then lied to Congress saying, no, people could tweet this, and that was a lie. And then maybe a day or two before the election allowed the story to circulate. Again, a poll of Rasmussen showed that 1/3 of Democrats said they would not have voted for Joe Biden if they saw this. You can't show me them censoring, quote, stories. And again, the reasoning that they gave, that them and Facebook gave was, well, we couldn't verify the story. And yet any conspiracy theory about Trump or about Republicans was allowed to continue without any censorship whatsoever.
Okay, quick rejoinder, and then let's go to the Q&A.
Yeah, it was the article was blocked on October 14th. That was rescinded around, I believe, October 16th. And then the New York Post had its account reinstated on October 30th, which is before the election. So, yeah, I mean, if you think this one...
It's just not true. He says that the Post article was taken down the 14th and brought back the 16th. It's just not true.
Story would have broken the back of Biden's campaign. Fair enough. I just, and I'm not a big fan of Biden, but I don't think this one story would have had that much impact.
It's not just one story. It
okay,
was
Robbie, just let him have the last word because you did go first.
Okay, sure.
Okay, so let's go ahead and hit the Q&A. Let me get the 30 minutes on the clock.
I think we'll skip the Q&A. Let's see if there's a final statement.
Significant problems with the Republican Party. I'm my own person.
Believe that grievances and conspiracies are the only valid way of engaging. Blah again. Mr. Blah 25 asks, it wasn't the Democrats.
Of everyone, but yeah, it's a very fine line. These new forms of communication, it's maybe laid out how things are. I don't know.
Okay. Here's a question from
A dangerous precedent. Some things we ought to consider the better, honestly.
And I'll answer this real quick. Anyone who has a problem with corporate influence in our election and our speech should be concerned that these companies that control about 90% of our speech would be the arbiters of what's allowed to be spoken. This is a nightmare, a fascist nightmare of corporate takeover.
Okay, and that is our time. I do want to respect our speaker's time, and I don't know if Brace has a hard time out, so let's just go ahead and wrap this up. I want to thank both of you for a respectful and productive discussion. I want to thank our moderators in the chat for keeping everything.
I guess that's it. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't particularly think that was close. And now with the revelations we have from the Twitter files, I feel like I was on it a year and a half ago quite significantly. I think that aged particularly well. I will try to reach out to Chud Logic and see if he would like to have another conversation given what we know now. I would guess he would not, would be my guess. But I think this debate, if I'm going to give my pros and cons of my performance in this debate, the ultimate pro is that it's aged very well, given what we've seen with the Twitter files, and we have now definitive proof of a lot of the things that I was saying back then. I think that it shows that I was ahead of the curve, talking about these issues even before the Twitter files. I think that I kept a cool head. I didn't really raise my voice or yell or anything, but I stayed on offense the entire time, which I partly have to credit towards Chud Logic, because say what you will about him, I enjoy these types of debates, even if I think that Chud was, obviously so partisan and so biased that he was making some ridiculous arguments. We basically allowed each other to finish each other's sentence, or to finish our thoughts without interrupting. There wasn't a lot of just ad hom attacks and things like that. So those are the types of debates that I really enjoy. So I think that I sounded good. I sounded professional. I enjoyed that. Where could I have gotten better? Well, I think that I could have done a better job kind of getting the discussion away from Trump specifically. We spent a lot of time on that. So maybe if I would have spent more time talking about some of the specific issues, not just people that were censored, but issues that were censored. So more surrounding COVID, more surrounding, things like that. I think maybe that would have been more fruitful. And I think that I should have spent more time talking about the implications of what does this mean that this censorship was occurring. I also think that I could have been more aggressive pointing out sort of the idea that this was a conspiracy theory, that Chud was using that sort of language. Just how many of these conspiracy theories have shown to be true. Beringer Hitler says, why you speed up when the man right above says something? Show him and let him speak what he what. A European has to learn you about free speech. Perhaps an American ought to learn you about English? I don't know. I'm not quite sure what you're trying to say there. I thought that I let him speak as much as he wanted. So, I'm not sure what's going on there. But yeah, I enjoyed that rewind. So, some things coming up here. Tomorrow, I'm going to try to do a debate review. I have no idea what I'm going to review. My Discord is available. Please get on my Discord channel. Give me some suggestions of what to review. I'm going to try to limit it to 2 hours. So, I can be quite lengthy when I'm watching a debate. And kind of analyzing it, so I might not get through an entire debate. Vosh vs. Aftershock, you've been asking me to review that for a long time. It's a shit debate, but I mean, I could do it. It's absolute shit. But sure. I hesitate to do Vosh vs. Charlie Kirk too, because the last 2 debate reviews I did was Vosh. So that'll be 3 in a row, but if I don't have a better suggestion, I'll do it. Yeah, Charlie, it's shit because Charlie doesn't do that well. But we could do that. But yeah, feel free to give suggestions for debates. I haven't seen that much. I saw it like in the background while I was driving, so I didn't pay much attention. Maybe I will do that. Wednesday will be a normal show. Thursday, I'm not sure what I got coming up. Friday will be Drunken Debates. It's going to start at 8:30 Eastern Time. I will be debating in that. I think it'll be a 6-person panel. John Burke will be moderating. The topics will not be disclosed. So John will just tell us what the topics are when we get there. The only other person that I know that is participating is Dylan Burns. So I'm trying to find 2 more conservative or moderate people and then 2 more left-wing people for that panel. But I don't want them to just be anybody. Hopefully it'll be people that I can trust will actually be able to make a coherent argument, even if it's one that I disagree with. And then I might do some stuff with John Burke's podcast this week as well. I'm not sure. But that's the plan. So tomorrow night, similar time, 9 p.m. Eastern, we'll be doing a debate review to be determined. So if you want to give... Sorry, I was reading something here. Do old IBS stream debates. IBS? I don't know what that is. But, yeah, feel free to use my Discord. Just one more thing. I know that people were talking about this Buffalo Bill player, Damar Hamlin, I believe is his name. It's really a terrible situation. It's easy to be cynical. It's easy to say, well, people die every day. But to see that sort of a health scare on national TV, it's really a sobering thing. My wife sent me an update here. It says, this is what a person by the name of Jordan Rooney is reporting. His vitals are back to normal, and they have put him to sleep with a breathing tube down his throat. They're currently running tests, and the source that told him was his friend and marketing rep. The hit didn't look that bad, but I'm not going to sit here and speculate. Oh, it must be because of the vaccine, or oh, it must be because there was a helmet hit him in the chest, or oh, maybe it's because he was on a strenuous workout routine or medications that he was on. I don't know. I try my best not to speculate about that stuff. I will say that as disgusting as it was how many left-wingers wanted to mock people that died that weren't vaccinated, I do not like to see people turn on that and say, ha, that person got, oh, that must have been the vaccine. We don't know that. We don't. It could be true that vaccines are responsible for people dying. We'll see as the data comes out. I have my opinions on it. I've talked on it. But in a real moment, as someone's dying, or within the days or twos after someone collapses or dies, I don't think that's the time to kind of I told you so about this sort of stuff. So you won't hear me doing that sort of stuff. I have no idea why this happened. It could have literally just been a freak hit the way that he was hit. But man, that's tough. That's tough. Imagine being his family and watching that in person or on television. It's brutal. So thoughts and prayers with him. It's really sad. Now the panel debates with John Burks will be at most 6-person panel debates. So, all right, let's find someone to raid on Twitch, and then I'm gonna get out of here and get some work done here.
If we're going down, then play Protest a Hero. No, thank you.
How about Stardust? Now, I know Stardust might not be everyone's favorite here, but she did raid me the other day. So, I'd like to return the favor.
What's next? Next.
Yeah, Carnage, we could talk about that maybe Wednesday night. But I am going to get running here now. Yeah, I mean, basically, Computer Carnage's take is Republicans should not engage in ballot harvesting or presumably mail-in voting and things like that because it's bad. This is the best way I could put it with an analogy. Say that you were a football team back in the day before passing was legal, right? And then some team gets a quarterback that can throw the ball and lobbies and gets the rules changing where now you're allowed to pass the ball. And that team's winning every game because they have the only quarterback that can pass the ball forward. Now, you could sit there and complain and say, this isn't fair. These rules are garbage. We hate the rules. It's ruined the sport. So therefore, we will not get a quarterback that can pass the ball and we will never throw the ball forward. And then you'll lose every game. It's the same thing here to say, well, ballot harvesting is bad, it's unethical, therefore Republicans shouldn't try to do it. The Democrats will say, thank you very much, Computer Carnage. We agree. Everyone listen to Computer Carnage. He's right. It's so horrible. Republicans should never do it. And then Democrats will win election after election, and Republicans will say, we need to change that ballot harvesting law. And Democrats will go, well, do you control the House, the Senate, and the President? Oh, you don't, so you can't change the law. Well, great. We're going to keep ballot harvesting, and you keep complaining about it, and we'll keep winning. That's basically in a nutshell what it is. It's right in Florida and Texas where they ballot harvested. Right, where they effectively use mail-in voting and ballot harvesting, and in some areas of California. Right, exactly. Yep, that's exactly you literally proved my point, Computer Carnage. Republicans learned we have to operate within this system. Computer Carnage, can you explain to me, and I'll give you a chance, I know it's harder to type, so I'll definitely give you a chance here before I go. Can you explain to me how a Republican wins in Pennsylvania without ballot harvesting? Go ahead. Go ahead. A stroke victim won. John Fetterman won. How do you win without that? I mean, it's not even really Computer Carnage. I respect you. I really enjoy that you're coming on here. It's not even worth the discussion. It is. You want to have a discussion that literally takes us beyond what all obvious knowledge is and provable knowledge is. The effects of ballot harvesting. I don't know what to say. It's just. The argument you're making is an argument for the perpetual victory of the Democratic Party, and I choose to reject that. But you're more than willing to embrace that ideology. It is the lovable loser Republican ideology. We're in principle against that, and therefore we won't do it, and we'll continue to lose over and over, but at least we have our principles. That's cool. All right, we're raiding Stardust. Be nice. I will see you all tomorrow evening. Yeah, not everything's a Lord of the Rings metaphor. Thank you all so much. I will see you all tomorrow evening. As always, have a good one.
In this scenario, and apparently, where I have